My name is Walter Haynes. I'm 76 years old, a retired history teacher, and a widower for almost a decade. I live in the house I built with my own hands in 1982, a modest two-story home with a wide porch and creaking stairs, nestled in a quiet corner of Cedar Ridge, Nebraska. When I say I built it, I mean I laid the foundation myself, hammered in the nails, stained the wood. Every floorboard holds a memory. Every dent in the banister tells a story. I used to think that kind of permanence mattered, that if you poured enough love and sweat into something, it became untouchable. I don't believe that anymore. Since my wife, Patricia, passed away from ovarian cancer, the house has grown quieter by the year. The silence is no longer peaceful, not the kind that comes from contentment after a long life lived well. It is the kind that seeps into the walls and makes your bones ache when you lie awake at night, wondering what's left. Patricia was the fire in this house. She kept things moving. She was sharp and funny, fond of crossword puzzles and humming old Ella Fitzgerald tunes while making chicken casserole. She had a strength in her that kept the family together, even when the boys, Jeremy and Craig, were at each other's throats over petty childhood rivalries. She softened my edges, too, reminded me to be patient, to forgive quickly. Without her, I found myself drifting, my routines growing rigid, my world smaller. Jeremy, my eldest, lives in Kansas City now. He's in commercial real estate, or at least that's what he tells me when we speak, which is not often. Craig, my younger son, works in landscaping and still lives nearby, though I hardly see him. They both grew up in this house, shared a room for 10 years, argued over the television remote, broke the kitchen window with a baseball when they were 12 and 10. We were a typical American family, or so I thought. I taught at the local high school for over 30 years, which gave me summers off to take the boys camping, to Yellowstone, to the Rockies. Patricia loved those trips, even though she hated the mosquitoes. We weren't rich, but we had enough. We had each other. Now the old photographs in the hallway seem like evidence of a life that belonged to someone else. A younger version of myself smiles back from behind glass, holding baby Jeremy in the hospital, sitting at a picnic table with Craig beside a fishing pole, standing arm in arm with Patricia on our 25th anniversary. Back then, I thought that family meant something permanent, like this house. Like the land, something unbreakable. But time has a way of hollowing out everything you thought was solid. The boys grew up, grew apart from me. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was too strict, too focused on education, too stingy with affection. I remember Jeremy once saying, during an argument when he was 17, that I cared more about history than the people living in it. I tried to change after that, tried to be softer, especially after Patricia got sick. But whatever I tried never seemed to land right. Jeremy was always impatient with me, always in a rush, always sizing up the world in numbers and percentages. Craig was quieter, more withdrawn, and after a while, he stopped coming around except when he needed something, tools, money, advice he rarely took. The last time both boys were under my roof was the Christmas after Patricia died. I remember standing in the kitchen, watching them both scroll through their phones while her favorite Nat King Cole record played on the turntable. I offered to make her famous eggnog, and Jeremy smirked and said, "No offense, Dad, but that was kind of Mom's thing." Craig just shrugged. It was like trying to host strangers. I never felt more alone. Since then, our contact dwindled to birthday texts and obligatory holiday calls. They have their lives, their obligations, their children I rarely see. Sometimes, when I sit on the porch and watch the neighborhood kids ride their bikes past my yard, I wonder what my grandkids look like now. I only have framed school photos from 5 years ago to go by. I used to send them Christmas cards with a check tucked inside. Now I don't even know if they receive them. So when Jeremy called out of the blue last spring and told me he was getting remarried, I was genuinely surprised. "She's wonderful, Dad," he said. "You'll like her." Her name was Lisa, a divorcee with 2 kids of her own. We're keeping it small, just family and close friends out at Lake Eden, he explained. Then he added, as if it were an afterthought, we'd really love for you to be there. I hung up that night feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe this was the turning point. Maybe this new marriage would be the thing that brought Jeremy closer again, gave me a second chance at being part of his life. I imagined sitting with him after the ceremony, sharing a drink, talking like we used to. Maybe we'd laugh over old stories. Maybe he'd ask me to be involved, to help guide his stepchildren the way I used to guide him. For weeks, I planned what I would wear. I took my old grey suit to the dry cleaner and polished my shoes. I even bought a new tie, navy blue with thin silver stripes. Subtle but respectable. I rehearsed what I would say to Lisa, how I would tell her I was happy she made my son happy. I practiced smiling in the mirror, trying to erase the worry lines that had dug trenches into my face these past 10 years. The invitation came in the mail, a thick, cream-colored card with embossed gold lettering. It read, "Together with their families, Jeremy Haynes and Lisa Carmichael request the honor of your presence." I stared at the phrase, "together with their families," for a long time. I wasn't sure I was still part of that category, but I was willing to try. I RSVP'd yes the same day. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I didn't hear much from Jeremy. A few logistical emails, nothing personal. When I tried calling him to ask if he needed help with anything, I got his voicemail. Still, I made my plans. I booked a modest room at a nearby motel and arranged a ride to the venue, which was nearly 4 hours from my home. The day of the wedding, I woke early, shaved carefully, and put on my best cologne. Patricia's favorite, even though I hadn't worn it in years. As I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie, I told myself this was the beginning of something better. That maybe, just maybe, I would come home with a heart less heavy. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't possibly have imagined, was that this day would become the final fracture in my already splintered family. That before the reception ended, I would be publicly humiliated, betrayed in a way no father should be. That I would leave that place not just heartbroken, but homeless. But that, I suppose, is the part of the story that comes next. The wedding venue was as extravagant as it was unfamiliar. Lake Eden was one of those places that appeared in glossy brochures advertising luxury countryside retreats. All stone lodges, manicured gardens, and white tents strung with delicate fairy lights. It was picturesque, no doubt about it, but it felt curated, artificial, like something borrowed from a lifestyle magazine meant to impress people who were already too numb to be impressed. I arrived early, nervous not to be late, and found myself lingering near the back of the main lodge, unsure of where I fit in. There were people bustling about in coordinated navy blue attire, wedding planners, I assumed, all wearing earpieces and speaking in clipped, efficient tones. I saw no familiar faces for at least 20 minutes. No one approached me, not even with a polite smile. I held the small wrapped box I had brought, an antique pocket watch that had belonged to my father, which I'd polished the night before, and waited for someone to acknowledge me. I was starting to feel foolish standing there in my old suit, trying to look useful while guests arrived in sleek cars and headed off toward the ceremony site. Eventually, Jeremy appeared. He was wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo with a boutonniere of white orchids pinned to his lapel. He looked thinner than I remembered, a little grayer at the temples, but still unmistakably my son. When he spotted me, he offered a quick smile, almost perfunctory, as if he were greeting a distant cousin. "Dad," he said, approaching with a clap on my shoulder. "Glad you made it." His eyes flicked down at the gift in my hands, then back up. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't introduce me to anyone. There was a moment of silence before I broke it. "You look good, son," I said. Patricia would have loved to see this day. "Yeah," he said absently, glancing over his shoulder. "Listen, can I talk to you for a second? Privately?" I nodded, thinking perhaps he wanted to share something personal, something sincere before the ceremony. Maybe nerves, or even a thank you for raising him. My heart softened with that thought. He led me away from the lawn and through a side entrance into one of the smaller rooms inside the main lodge. It was furnished like a boardroom, long table, leather chairs, a carafe of water and glasses. Jeremy shut the door behind us and turned to face me with a different expression, serious, detached. "I need to talk to you about the house," he said. The sentence landed like a stone. I blinked. "The house?" "Yeah, the one you're living in. Look, Lisa and I have been talking, and we think it's time you transferred the deed." I laughed, a nervous, awkward sound. "Transferred the deed? Why would I do that?" "Because it makes sense," he replied quickly. "You're living there alone. It's old, it needs maintenance, and honestly, Dad, it's not practical. Lisa and I want to build equity. We'd move in, do renovations. You'd come live with us, maybe in the guest house we're planning to build on the property." I stood there, struggling to process what he was saying. "You want me to sign over my house on the day of your wedding?" "I'm not asking you to move out tonight," he said, holding up his hands. "I'm just saying, let's be smart. It's an asset that could benefit the whole family. You're not using the full space. You've said yourself it's too much for one person." "No," I said, sharper than I meant. "That house is my home, Jeremy. It's where your mother and I raised you. It's where she died. It's not some asset to be redistributed." He sighed and stepped closer, dropping his voice to that condescending tone adult children use when they think their parents are being stubborn. "Dad, come on. You know I'm right. We're not trying to hurt you. We just want to plan ahead. You're getting older, and things could, well, they could change fast. Medical bills, care expenses. This way, everything's streamlined." "I don't need a lecture on getting old," I snapped. "What I need is for my son to show some respect." He looked at me, and something changed in his eyes. A coldness set in. "You're being unreasonable." "I'm being a father," I said, my voice trembling now, but not from fear, from anger. "And that house is mine. It will remain mine until I decide otherwise, and I will not be manipulated into handing it over like a favor." There was a knock at the door, and one of the navy-clad staff members poked her head in. "Mr. Haynes, they're ready to begin." Jeremy turned to her and nodded. "We're done here." He didn't look at me as he left the room, just walked out like I wasn't even standing there, as though the whole conversation had been a transactional formality. I was left alone in the sterile, air-conditioned room with a weight of betrayal sitting heavy in my chest. I stood there for a minute, then another, unsure whether I was supposed to go join the others. I finally wandered back outside, trying to find my seat among the rows of chairs by the lakeshore. No one had saved me one. I took an empty spot at the end of a row, my hands still gripping the box I'd brought. The ceremony passed in a blur. I didn't hear the vows. I didn't taste the champagne. I clapped when others clapped and smiled when someone looked my way. My thoughts were spinning. How long had this plan been in motion? Had Lisa encouraged it? Did Craig know? As the reception began and people moved to the tented area for dinner and dancing, I stood to the side, unsure where I was supposed to be. A waiter approached me with a glass of wine, which I declined. A few distant relatives offered polite hellos, but no one lingered. I felt invisible. Then a security guard in a black blazer walked up to me. He was polite but firm. "Mr. Haynes, I've been asked to escort you off the premises." I stared at him. "Excuse me?" He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I was told to ask you to leave. Something about a family matter. I don't want to make a scene." I felt heat rise in my face. "Who asked you to do this?" "Sir, please." I turned and saw Jeremy across the lawn, standing near Lisa. He wasn't looking at me. He had his arm around his new wife and was laughing at something someone said. He didn't glance in my direction, not once. I looked back at the guard and nodded. "Fine." He walked with me to the parking lot in silence. I got into the taxi I had waiting and gave the driver the address of my motel. As we pulled away, I looked back one last time at the string-lit tent and the people dancing beneath it. My son had married into a new life, one that had no room for me in it. That was the night I realized something fundamental had changed, not just between Jeremy and me, but in the very fabric of what I thought family meant. That conversation, that cold demand for my home, and the humiliating way I was dismissed from his wedding, it wasn't just a moment of disrespect. It was a declaration. I was no longer needed, no longer seen as a parent or even a person. I was just a hurdle, an obstacle between my son and something he thought he deserved. And I knew, as the lights of Lake Eden faded in the distance, that this was only the beginning of something darker, something I would have to face alone. When I returned to my motel room that night, the walls felt like they were closing in. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, still dressed in my suit, staring at the floral wallpaper as if it might offer some explanation for what had just happened. The wrapped gift sat on the bedside table, unopened and unclaimed. I hadn't been able to bring myself to throw it away. Maybe part of me still hoped Jeremy would come to his senses, knock on my door, apologize, say it was all a mistake, that he had spoken in the heat of wedding stress, that the security guard was overzealous, that none of it was real. But I knew better. The look in his eyes when I refused to hand over my house, that was real. Cold. Final. The next morning, I woke early, not because I had slept well, but because sleep had never truly come. My body felt brittle, my thoughts sharp and unrelenting. I packed my suitcase in silence, left the motel key at the front desk, and took the first Greyhound back home. The 4-hour bus ride was filled with stale air and restless silence, interrupted only by the hiss of brakes and the occasional announcement of forgotten towns. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't read. I didn't eat. I stared out the window and watched the flat, familiar Nebraska landscape drift by, thinking only of one thing: my home. It was late afternoon by the time I finally pulled into Cedar Ridge and walked the short distance from the bus stop to my house. The sidewalk was cracked in places, but I had memorized every break and patch over the years. The maple tree I planted in '85 stood tall and proud in the front yard, its leaves just beginning to curl at the edges from the late summer sun. The sight of the house brought an unexpected lump to my throat. The porch light was off, the curtains drawn, just as I had left it. But when I reached the front steps and took the key from my pocket, I realized something was wrong. The lock was different. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I tried again, jiggling the key, then turning it the other way. It didn't fit. I stepped back and looked at the door more closely. The brass was shinier than I remembered. The screws were new. My hands trembled as I reached up and tried the screen door latch. That too had been replaced. My heart started pounding. I walked around to the back entrance. The kitchen door. Same story. New lock. No key worked. I circled the house, growing more frantic by the minute, until I spotted it. A sheet of paper taped to the side window near the driveway. It was an official-looking notice, printed on heavy paper and bearing a company logo in the top left corner. The words at the top read, "Notice of Lion Pending." Below that, a legal warning about the property being under financial dispute and restricted until resolution. I stood frozen, reading it again and again, my brain refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. My house, the one I had owned outright for over 30 years, the house I built with my own hands, was no longer mine, or at least not fully. I walked across the street to the Johnsons, my neighbors for over 2 decades. Rita opened the door, surprise flashing across her face when she saw me. "Walter, I thought you were out of town for the weekend." "I was," I said, my voice hollow. "Did you see anyone at my house while I was gone?" She hesitated, brushing her graying hair behind her ear. "Well, yes. Yesterday morning, a young man and a woman. Your son, I think. The younger one. Craig, right? And a woman in a pantsuit. They were going in and out of the house for a while. I assumed you knew." I closed my eyes. Craig. My quieter son. The one I thought was too passive to get involved in something like this. "Did they say anything to you?" "No," she said. "But I noticed a car with a Harrington Realty magnet on the door. Thought maybe you were selling." "Thank you," I said mechanically. "I appreciate it." I stumbled back across the street, dazed. The lock change, the lean notice, the appearance of a realtor. It all pointed to one chilling conclusion. My sons had gone behind my back. They were trying to take my home, by legal force, if necessary. I sat down on the front steps, which were still technically mine, though I no longer felt welcome even on my own concrete. My legs ached, but the pain in my chest eclipsed everything. I reached for my phone and called Jeremy. Straight to voicemail. I called Craig. Also voicemail. I left a message for each of them, simple and direct. "Call me. We need to talk. Now." I didn't receive a response that day, or the next. On the 3rd day, I drove to Craig's apartment. His car was there, but he didn't answer the door. The blinds were drawn. I knocked for 10 full minutes before giving up. That night, as I sat on the edge of the motel bed, I had no other place to go. I began reviewing old financial documents I had stored in my briefcase. Deed records, tax receipts, bank statements. My name was still on every official paper I had, but something gnawed at me. Could they have found a loophole? Used some trick to file a claim? I was not a legal man, but I was not a fool either. I called Alan Berryman, a former student of mine who had gone on to become a well-regarded real estate attorney in Omaha. He remembered me immediately. "Mr. Haynes," he said, "you are my favorite teacher. What can I do for you?" I told him everything. Not just the wedding, but the locks, the notice, the silence from my sons. He asked me to fax over every document I had, and I did so the next morning from the motel lobby. By afternoon, he called me back with news. "They've filed a claim of interest," he explained. "Your sons, specifically Craig, based on what looks like a power of attorney form, signed and notarized by you." "I never signed anything like that," I said immediately. "Then it's either forged or misrepresented. We can challenge it, but it's going to take time. In the meantime, you should prepare for a fight." "A fight?" I asked. "Against my own children?" Alan's voice was calm but firm. "I've seen it before, Mr. Haynes. When there's property involved, and especially when adult children think they're helping an aging parent, the gloves come off. You need to protect yourself, legally and financially." The next day we filed an injunction to halt any transfer or lien proceedings. Alan was swift and meticulous. He filed requests with the county to freeze any real estate transactions and initiated an investigation into the notarized documents. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was mine. It was my only lifeline. I stayed in that motel for a week, a purgatory of recycled air and vending machine meals, while the fight for my home began. I told no one except Alan what was happening. I couldn't bear the humiliation. The people at the diner still greeted me as Mr. Haynes, still remembered me as the man who taught their children the difference between World War I and World War II. How could I tell them that I no longer had a home to return to? Each day, I sat by the window with a notebook and a pen, trying to write down everything I remembered. Conversations, promises, incidents, warnings I hadn't seen at the time. It was like piecing together a betrayal that had been building for years beneath the surface of my family. Jeremy with his cold ambition, Craig with his quiet compliance, and me, the aging man who didn't see it coming because I believed blood was thicker than ambition. But the truth was unavoidable now. My sons didn't see me as a father anymore. They saw me as a burden wrapped in legal property. And I had no intention of going quietly. A week passed, and the motel room walls began to feel like they were closing in. I had brought a few shirts, a toothbrush, and my shaving kit, but I hadn't anticipated needing them for more than a night or two. I began to smell like dust and sadness. The television in the room only had 13 channels, most of them static. I spent hours flipping through the same weather updates and crime reruns, unable to focus on anything for long. I called Alan every day, sometimes twice. He was patient with me, always professional, always careful not to promise too much. He had submitted a fraud complaint regarding the power of attorney document Craig had used. If it was forged, he told me, we'll know soon enough. And if it wasn't forged but misrepresented, we can still challenge it. I appreciated his optimism, but I had been a teacher too long not to recognize when a student was trying to soften a hard truth. On the 8th day, Alan called me with something different in his voice. Urgency, maybe even concern. He told me that someone had attempted to refinance the house. Your house, Walter, he said. There was a loan application submitted under your name and Craig's, requesting a line of credit against the property. It got flagged because the notary information didn't match up with your prior records. I felt my blood run cold. So they're trying to mortgage it? I asked. Without your knowledge, yes, he said. But that attempt has already triggered a legal review. It may actually help us. That night I couldn't sleep at all. I lay there in the darkness with the pale green motel clock glowing 3:12 a.m., then 4:27, then 5:03. My mind went back to something Patricia once said to me during a rough patch in our marriage, when money was tight and we were considering selling the car. There are some things you don't sell, Walt, she told me. Some things you just keep because they hold your story. At the time, I didn't fully grasp it. Now I did. My house wasn't just a roof and walls. It was the last place where her voice still echoed when I walked through the hallway. It was the scent of her cinnamon soap in the upstairs bathroom. It was the creak of the third step that only I knew how to step over in the dark. It wasn't an asset. It was my entire past. The following morning, I took a cab to the courthouse and filed a personal affidavit swearing that I had never knowingly signed over power of attorney to Craig or Jeremy, and that any such documents were invalid. Alan advised me to keep it factual and unemotional, but I couldn't help adding a line at the end. I never imagined I would need to legally defend myself against my own sons. On my way out of the courthouse, I passed the bulletin board where lawyers sometimes posted ads or notices. Tucked between two rental listings was a flyer offering counseling services for seniors experiencing family estrangement. I didn't tear it down or scoff. I stood there and read the whole thing, quietly absorbing the fact that I was not the only one. It didn't make me feel better. It just confirmed something I already knew but hadn't wanted to say out loud. That family could be a danger, not just a comfort. When I got back to the motel, I found an envelope waiting for me at the front desk. No return address, just my name in large block letters. I took it to my room and opened it slowly. Inside was a short typed letter, unsigned, that read, "Dad, you're overreacting. This doesn't have to get ugly. Stop what you're doing and let us handle it. We'll make sure you're taken care of. But if you keep fighting, we won't have a choice." There was no greeting, no apology, no sign of affection. Just that, a veiled threat wrapped in the language of concern. I stared at the letter for a long time before folding it back into the envelope. I didn't call either of them. I didn't even cry. I just felt something shift inside me, like a thread had finally snapped. The next day, I went to Alan's office in person. I wanted to look him in the eye and ask a question I hadn't dared voice until then. I sat down across from his desk, placed my hands flat on the polished oak, and asked, "Can I sue my sons?" He blinked once, then twice. Sue them. For fraud, for trying to steal my house, for evicting me without cause, for emotional distress. I want to know if I can do it. Alan leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in his lap. Legally, yes. Morally, that's something you'll have to decide for yourself. I've decided, I said. They made their choice. I'm making mine. He nodded. Then we begin the process of full civil litigation. But you should know, once we file, it becomes public record. Your family's going to feel the heat. I hope they do, I said. And I meant it. The decision to sue my sons was not one I made lightly. It wasn't born from impulse or vengeance, though anyone looking from the outside might have thought so. It came from a place of finality, of realization, of that silent, cold moment when you accept that you are not part of your family anymore. At least not in the way families are supposed to function. The love between us, whatever remained, had been converted into legal filings and notarized betrayals. What was once flesh and blood was now reduced to signatures, claims, and disputes over property lines. I sat with Alan the next morning as he drafted the initial complaint. It named both Jeremy and Craig as co-defendants and outlined a series of actions that amounted, in plain legal terms, to coercive fraud, elder financial abuse, unlawful eviction, and misrepresentation through forged or manipulated documents. The most critical claim was that of intent, that they had intentionally and systematically maneuvered to take over my property, displace me from my home, and gain financial control over my remaining years under the guise of caretaking. Alan spoke plainly and moved carefully through each step, reading every line of the draft aloud as if to give me room to protest or reconsider. I didn't. I listened, nodded, and signed where he told me. It felt like watching someone write your will while you were still breathing. It was clinical, irreversible, and deeply intimate all at once. That same afternoon, we filed the case. The wheels of the court began to turn, slowly but definitively. The reaction came fast, faster than I expected. Within 3 days of the filing, I received a voicemail from Jeremy. He didn't yell. That wasn't his style. Instead, his voice was low, taut, and venomous in its restraint. "You really want to go this far, Dad? You want your name on court records next to ours? You want reporters sniffing around? You think that's going to help your reputation in town? You're sick. You need help. We tried to manage this privately, and you've dragged us into a circus. Don't expect sympathy." He didn't call again after that, and I didn't return the message. I saved it, though, and forwarded it to Alan, who added it to the file. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from Craig's attorney, or, more precisely, from the law firm that now represented both of my sons. The letter was a formal notice of countersuit. They were alleging that I had voluntarily signed over the house in a moment of clarity, that I was now suffering from cognitive decline, and that I was, in their words, a vulnerable elder susceptible to episodes of paranoia and impaired judgment. I sat at the motel desk reading those words and felt something like acid rising in my throat. They weren't just attacking my property. Now they were attacking my mind. They were building a case not just to take what was mine, but to define me out of existence. Alan wasn't surprised. He said it was a classic move in these kinds of cases. Make the elder look unstable, confuse the court into thinking the children are acting in the best interest of an ailing parent. It's disgusting, he said, but it's common. The best thing we can do is get ahead of it. Medical records, evaluations, testimony from friends and neighbors. You've been living independently. You've managed your finances. We prove that, and we take the teeth out of their entire strategy. I agreed to undergo a full cognitive evaluation, scheduled with a third-party geriatric specialist. The tests were exhausting. Memory, reasoning, logic, language comprehension, physical assessments. But I welcomed them. Every question I answered correctly was like a punch against the shadow they were trying to cast over me. At the end of it, the doctor sat me down and said, "Mr. Haynes, you are far from incompetent. Your cognitive scores are above average for your age. You are sharper than most people I see who are 10 years younger. Whatever this is about, it's not about your mind." I asked for a signed statement and had 3 certified copies made. But that wasn't the only blow coming. A week later, Alan called me with another piece of news. My name had been removed from a joint account that I had shared with Craig for over 20 years. I had originally opened it during his college years to help him manage tuition payments, and we had simply never closed it. I had deposited small amounts into it now and then. Birthday gifts, help with bills. I never considered that he might one day use the structure of the account to justify a financial claim. They're arguing that the account was co-managed and that over the years your irregular withdrawals suggest mental confusion, Alan said. We're challenging that, of course. But they've pulled all your bank statements. They're trying to establish a pattern of irrational behavior. I laughed bitterly at that. So being generous is now a symptom of madness. But the worst blow came not through the legal system, but through the community. Cedar Ridge is not a large town. People talk. And once the case became public, and once the local paper picked it up, everything shifted. It started with the checker at the grocery store who used to call me Mr. Haynes with warmth, now barely making eye contact. Then it was my barber, who suddenly had no open appointments. The worst was at church. I had been attending the same congregation for 35 years. I sang in the choir once. I organized food drives. But on the Sunday after the article appeared, I walked into the sanctuary and felt the silence wrap around me like plastic. The pastor gave me a polite nod, but didn't ask me to stand and speak like he usually did. No one offered to sit beside me. I sat alone in the pew while families whispered behind me. One of the deacons, an old friend named Roger, approached me after the service and said, "I don't want to get involved, Walt." "But are you really suing your own children?" I looked at him, stunned. "They tried to take my house, Roger. They changed the locks. They forged documents." He didn't meet my eyes. "Still," he said, "it just feels wrong." Wrong. That word echoed inside me like a verdict. I'd always believed that right and wrong were clear. That if you did the right thing, stood your ground, spoke the truth, you would be seen for who you were. But in the court of public opinion, image mattered more than truth. And rightness was just a matter of who spoke first or loudest. So I stopped going to church. I stopped going to the diner. I stopped walking down Main Street. I became a ghost in my own town, an old man in exile, shamed not for what I had done, but for daring to protect what was mine. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, but inside me something hardened. That's when I made the second big decision, to sell the house. I still had the original deed, and because Alan had managed to freeze the fraudulent power of attorney, I had the legal authority to initiate proceedings on my share. It wouldn't be easy. The house was technically in dispute. But if I could find a buyer willing to go through the process, I could force a sale through the courts. Alan explained that it was called a partition action, when joint owners couldn't agree and the court stepped in to divide or sell the property. It was drastic, slow, and expensive, but I had no intention of dying while my sons waited for the last nail to go in the coffin. I found a local real estate agent who had dealt with similar cases. Her name was Marla Dorsey. She was in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a voice like gravel. She didn't flinch when I told her the situation. "You're not the first, Mr. Haynes," she said. "You wouldn't believe how many adult kids see their parents' homes as future jackpots. But if you're willing to fight, I'm willing to help." Within a week, she had appraised the property and found 2 interested buyers who didn't mind the legal baggage. We submitted an offer to the court, along with a formal petition for sale. The process would take months, but it had begun. When the notice of sale arrived at Jeremy's office, he finally broke the silence and showed up in person, at my motel. He didn't knock gently. He pounded on the door like a debt collector. When I opened it, he stood there in his crisp shirt and tie, his face pale with fury. "You filed for sale," he barked. "You're actually going to sell the house?" I didn't blink. "It's still 1/3 mine, legally and morally." "You're out of your mind," he hissed. "You're going to destroy this family over a piece of property." "You already destroyed it," I said. "You just didn't expect me to notice." He stared at me, jaw clenched, fists tight at his sides. For a moment I thought he might hit me, but then he stepped back and spat his final words. "You want war, old man? You've got it." He left without another word. I stood in the doorway watching him go, heart racing, blood pounding in my ears, and knew that whatever came next would not be civil or quiet or quick. I had drawn a line, and they were going to try to erase it, but I was no longer afraid. I was 76, yes. I was alone, yes. But I still had my name, I still had my mind, and I still had the will to fight. The courtroom was not how I imagined it. There were no grand speeches, no pounding gavels or dramatic interruptions, no righteous declarations like in the movies. It was smaller, quieter, almost antiseptic, with beige walls, flickering fluorescents, and the tired smell of old paper and stress. But in that modest, ordinary space, everything that mattered about my life was on the table. My sanity, my home, my legacy, my name. The judge, a thin man with a soft voice and permanent frown lines, sat behind the bench looking more like a weary school principal than a dispenser of justice, but the power he held was absolute. I arrived early, wearing my best suit, the same one I'd worn to Jeremy's wedding, the same one I'd been thrown out in. It still smelled faintly of cedar, and something in me wanted to believe that the memory of dignity clung to its fabric. Alan stood beside me at our table, calm and methodical, a man who had grown used to watching families fracture under the weight of property and pride. Across from us sat my sons, side by side, flanked by their attorney, a sleek woman with lacquered nails and a laptop she never seemed to close. Jeremy didn't look at me. Craig did, briefly, and I saw something in his eyes. Not guilt, not regret, but a flicker of nervousness, like a boy caught cheating on a test who still believes he might talk his way out of it. The judge began by reviewing the documents. The deed, the contested power of attorney, the bank transactions, the lien notice, the attempted refinancing. He asked questions in a dry, neutral tone, but I could feel the tension building with each line of inquiry. The other side leaned heavily on the claim that I was mentally unstable, citing age, financial inconsistency, my sudden paranoia, and the strained family dynamic. They presented their own set of medical notes, questionably sourced, suggesting cognitive decline, memory lapses, susceptibility to influence. When Alan cross-examined, he eviscerated the so-called evidence, noting that the notes came from a general practitioner who hadn't seen me in over a year and had made no formal assessment. Then he introduced the results of my full cognitive evaluation. Objective, clinical, signed by a certified specialist, and the court went silent as he read the final line. Mr. Walter Haynes demonstrates full capacity and awareness, with no signs of cognitive impairment. It was a technical sentence, but in that moment it felt like a sword slicing clean through a knot of lies. Next came my turn. The judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. Alan had advised me not to let the documents and arguments speak for themselves, but I stood up anyway. My knees ached and my voice cracked at first, but I had carried too much silence for too long to sit still any longer. I told the court how I had built that house with my own hands, how I had raised 2 sons within its walls, how I had nursed my dying wife in its bedroom, and how I had come home from my own son's wedding to find myself locked out of the life I had given everything to build. I told them how I had begged for explanations and received only threats, how I had tried to resolve things privately and was met with legal maneuvers and gaslighting. I told them that this was not a case of confusion or senility, but a case of betrayal, and that the people I once called my family had decided that what I owned was more valuable than who I was. I said that I wasn't seeking revenge. I just wanted the right to live in peace, to die with dignity, to protect what little remained of the life I had carved out of years of work and sacrifice. When I finished, there was no applause, no dramatic swell of music, just silence. But I saw the judge look at me in a way that was different, not pitying, not skeptical, just human. He thanked me and asked me to sit. The deliberation took 2 days. I spent those nights at a different motel, one further away from town, where no one knew my name. I watched old war documentaries on the TV, not because I cared about the battles, but because they reminded me of strategy, of endurance, of holding your line when everything is falling apart. On the 3rd morning, Alan called. His voice was firm. "We won, Walter," he said. "The judge ruled in our favor on every major point. The sale is approved. Your co-ownership is validated. The countersuit is dismissed. They have 30 days to comply." I said nothing at first. I just sat there, holding the phone, staring at the faded curtain, feeling something loosen in my chest like a thread unraveling. "Thank you," I said eventually. "That doesn't even begin to cover it, but thank you." Later that week, Jeremy called me, not to apologize, not to ask forgiveness, but to scream. His voice was hoarse, frantic, desperate. "You've ruined everything. We have nowhere to go, Dad. You've destroyed your own family." I listened. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I said, "You made that choice long before I did. I just finally stopped letting you pretend otherwise." He hung up. I haven't heard from him since. Craig sent a short email a few days later. "I didn't know it would go this far. I'm sorry." I read it twice and deleted it. Some apologies are too little, too late, and too convenient. The court's decision gave me more than just a legal victory. It gave me something I hadn't realized I'd lost entirely: my self-respect. For years, I had chipped away at myself, handing out money, writing checks, making excuses, convincing myself that sacrifice was the price of love. But now I saw it differently. Sacrifice without reciprocity isn't noble. It's surrender. And I was done surrendering. I began making plans. The house would be sold, and I would receive my full share of the proceeds. I asked Alan to handle everything. I didn't want to speak to my sons again, not even through lawyers. I found a small apartment in a nearby town, quiet and clean, with a view of a park where children played in the afternoons and old men like me walked their dogs. I signed a lease. I changed my phone number. I closed the joint accounts. I called the DMV and had the red SUV that Craig had left in my garage declared abandoned. After 30 days, I sold it and added the money to my savings. I told no one where I was going. I vanished from their reach. I don't know where Jeremy and Craig live now. I don't know what they've told their children, their wives, their friends. Maybe they say I lost my mind. Maybe they say I betrayed them. Maybe they've spun a narrative where they're the victims of a cruel old man who couldn't share. I don't care. The truth is written in court records, in notarized decisions, in bank statements and depositions. But more than that, it's written in my heart, in the quiet knowledge that I stood up for myself when no one else would, that I didn't die quietly, that I didn't fade away. Sometimes I sit by the window in my new apartment and wonder what Patricia would say. I think she would have cried, seeing what our sons became. I think she would have blamed herself, gently, unfairly. I think she would have told me to forgive, but I also think she would have understood. She knew what it meant to fight for dignity. She taught me that, and now I live in a place where I am no longer surrounded by ghosts or false obligations. The silence here is different. It isn't hollow, it's mine. The final check arrived on a Wednesday morning. A clean white envelope, no return address, just my name printed in that familiar, efficient, court-issued font. Inside was the closing statement, the distribution summary, and a cashier's check bearing a number that somehow felt too large and too small at the same time. It represented decades of labor, years of memory, the cost of my children's absence, and the price of their ambition. I held it in my hands for a long moment before setting it down beside the kettle and making tea. I didn't celebrate. There was no music, no toast, no sense of triumph. It was simply over. The house had been sold. The funds were mine. And yet there was no joy in it, only a quiet steadiness, like exhaling after holding your breath underwater for too long. I stood by the window of my new apartment, the one with the second-hand drapes and the view of the elm trees, and I thought about how strange it was to begin again at 76. The furniture was all different. No creaky stairs, no worn banister, no scent of Patricia's soap in the bathroom. Just a clean, scentless quiet. I had bought a small radio, the kind with a dial instead of buttons, and tuned it most afternoons to the oldies station. Sometimes I cooked simple meals and sat with a book. Sometimes I walked to the park and fed the birds, or watched the children swing from the jungle gym. No one knew my name here. I liked that. I became just another man with gray hair and a grocery bag, moving through the world without commentary. There was a peace in anonymity. But peace, I've learned, is not the same as healing. Healing takes longer. It lives in the uncomfortable questions you ask yourself late at night when the lights are off and the only sound is your own breathing. I thought a lot about forgiveness, not as a gift to be given, but as a weight to be laid down. Not for them, for me. I couldn't carry all that betrayal forever, not without letting it change the shape of who I was. But I also couldn't forget. I wouldn't pretend that what they had done was anything less than cruelty disguised as entitlement. My sons had stood at the edge of my grave and demanded the shovels early. I would never unsee that. One afternoon, several weeks after the sale was finalized, I received a letter. No name on the envelope. Just a return address in Ohio. Inside was a short note written in looping cursive. It was from Jeremy's daughter, my granddaughter, Emily. She was 20 now, a college sophomore. We hadn't spoken in years. The letter was brief, but it knocked the air out of me. Grandpa, I saw what happened. I don't know all the details, but I want you to know I remember. You used to read to me in the den. You made popcorn on the stove. I remember you. I hope you're okay. Love, Emily. That letter now sits in a frame on my bookshelf. It is the one thread not broken, the one part of my family that didn't turn its back. I haven't written her back yet. I don't know what to say, but I will. I don't know what the future holds. My health is decent for now. I walk every day. I take my pills. I keep my appointments. I've started volunteering at the library twice a week, sorting returned books, helping seniors learn email. The librarian, a quiet woman named June, sometimes joins me for coffee afterward. We don't talk about the past. We talk about books, about the weather, about small things. It's enough. It's honest. And it doesn't ask for anything more than presence. That, I've found, is more precious than loyalty bought with guilt. Some nights I still dream of the house. Not the betrayal, not the court, just the kitchen light left on. Patricia humming softly in the next room, the warmth of a space built by hands that believed in permanence. I don't resent those dreams. I welcome them. They remind me that I built something once, not just with wood and nails, but with care. And though that structure was taken, the truth of what it held remains in me, untouchable. They thought they could take my dignity by taking my home. They thought they could write me out of the story, but I'm still here. I'm still writing.